Hey, like I say, I have to walk around because unlike Ed, I was born in Cuba, and if you stand behind a podium and start talking this type of stuff that we're saying, you get an easy shot right there. So, so I like to move around in case I need to dash out when I see something weird going on from the back of the room. So thanks, Ed. Ed has helped us a lot in Texas. The last time we did something together, we almost got kicked out of the room, remember? So he passed the microphone and he said, remember, don't swear. So I will try not to swear. But let me tell you a little bit. First, thanks, Marshall. Mark, where is Mark? You all have dealt with Mark Pelka. He's back here someplace. He's outside. I thank Mark for all the work. This is the new generation. I'm getting to that age. I was telling Reggie, getting to that age, I want to pass it on to these guys, okay? I've done enough of this stuff. But to show you something that I thought is reflective of some of the issues that we're going to deal with here is that I just got back from a vacation, 7 days in Puerto Rico. I haven't done that in a long time. My parents left Cuba. We went to Puerto Rico. I grew up there. I was fortunate enough during my teenage year to grow up basically like a beach bum doing these water shows in the old PR Sheraton. I was a clown diver, which is great training for this job. So so I told my wife, let's stay there, let's splurge, stay over there, and we did. It's the PR Marriott. First day we go to the beach, and there's this huge red flag flapping and a big sign saying, red flag, bad ocean, you go there, you die. And my wife is, you want to go in? Of course I want to go in. I grew up here. This scene looks the same as I was a kid. So I just run into the ocean, jump in, start doing body surfing and stuff. Eventually she came in. And for the 6 days, we're swimming, and the flag's still there. So finally, the last day, I go to the guy that's at the gate. I say, what's the deal with the flag? When do you put the green and yellow flag? He said, never. We only have one flag, and it's red. And I said, are you kidding me? I said, no, it's always red. We never change it. And I started thinking when I was growing up there were 2 lifeguards on the beach, 2 lifeguards on the pool. And those lifeguards will guide you through whether it was a bad day, don't go in the ocean, a hurricane is near, it's a bad deal. But right now, what we have is this red flag that is basically covering the behind of the hotel so they don't get sued if somebody drowns. So in the old days, they will prevent somebody from drowning, which seems to be a better policy. Now they just drown, and you're gonna sue me. So this is the culture that we're dealing with, and it's a culture that has permeated the probation system, not only here, but everywhere. But what I'm gonna tell you that here is a little bit worse, because at least there, if you go to every hotel, all the flags are red, and you know what it means. But here, you go to different probation department, and it's red flag, blue flag, all kind of colors, and you don't know what it means because there is no standards to really set up what is called evidence-based practices in the system. As a footnote, I'm going to compare Ohio with Texas. Some people, why? Well, Texas is the center of the universe. I don't have to tell you that. But besides that, there's good reasons for that. I think as a point of comparison for you to understand where Ohio is and the need to reform your probation system, it's good to talk a little bit about Texas. We have elected judges. We have local probation departments. We have judges that hire and fire probation directors. We get a funding subsidy from the state, and we have a strong county home rule, so to speak. 254 counties, 2 or 3 counties in Texas are probably as big as the whole state of Ohio. So if we do stuff in Texas that have led to the standardization of evidence-based practices and probation, I do not see why it cannot be done in a place like Ohio. Then as a footnote, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what we did in Travis County. Travis County is Austin, Texas, and it's the place where we have implemented a top-to-bottom evidence-based practices model. And I'm gonna compare that with San Antonio, where in Bexar County, it's called Bexar County, San Antonio, where their department look a lot like a lot of the departments here. And you have some departments that are closer to Travis County, but I think a lot of the departments are like San Antonio. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the results of that. And the reason we do that comparison is because we have spent many, many years in Texas, and we have a lot of data, a lot of longitudinal data to show you what is the potential impact of organizing a probation department like this versus like this other way. And a lot of this have to deal with the challenge. Ed talks about the risk principle and criminogenic needs and the need to address that. And then you have to take that and rewire a probation department to make sure that they can do that well. And we're gonna talk about that. The Travis County work has been documented extensively, and it's, we can get you those documents. Here's the essence of the evidence-based practices model, and this is where I get politically incorrect. But basically, in a nutshell, you have three types of offenders out there. Some that will do okay no matter what. You put them on supervision and they do okay no matter what. Some that will not do okay. They're red. They are high-risk offenders. And then the in-between people, and I call that swingers. I always get in trouble with that word. Chris is laughing because I say, in Kansas, I use that word, and people, whoa, 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 no, no, no. In California, yeah, swingers. I can relate to that. So Ohio, I don't know. It's kind of in between. But the swingers are the one that you have to do something, and you can move them into the okay category if you have the right type of supervision. So when you're wiring up, and this is a different way of putting it, and Marshall doesn't like this, but this is a judge in Winona, Minnesota, that wrote this book that calls these people normal, ordinary, responsible people, that kind of your low risk, and then the slugs and the slicks. Totally politically incorrect, but I did not come up with that. It was that judge that came up with that. But just to give you, at the end of the day, there are kind of these three categories that you can conceptualize. So you need to have assessment protocols that identify these people well. That's the first thing that you need to have. And the movement of auras and what Ed said about that assessment system is critical component of doing that. Then you have to have supervision strategies that effectively combine the right treatment, control, and incentive. You need to have programs and services that target the appropriate population, and you need to have progressive sanctions that are tuned to each group and are consistently applied. So once you know who these people are and you put them on supervision, the idea, like I mentioned earlier, is to reduce the supervision resources spent on the low-level risk people, to provide reinforcement incentives, programs to change behavior to the people that are kind of the middle, the swingers, and to provide surveillance and treatment when appropriate to the red people. This is as simple as it gets, okay? The trick is how you rewire a whole probation system to do that. Along with that, you have to have consistent sanctioning. High tolerance for minor violations to the low-risk people, higher tolerance for violations of treatment conditions. If a person is in treatment and makes a urinalysis and that's all there is to it, then that's okay if the person is still engaged in treatment, but low tolerance to the high-risk red people. And you have to do this consistently. And I'm laying out the framework because I'm going to tell you that you don't have a statewide policy to promote this type of model, and this is what you need. In Travis County, just quickly, we created a well-developed diagnosis report that goes to the court. Each judge over there get a summary report that tells them the basic information about the people that they're being considered for probation. They get a grid, like I showed earlier, that have risks and kind of needs, and they know where a person lying there. And based on that, the supervision strategies are designed to achieve the goals that we know are the best under that grid. And everything falls from that. Supervision strategy, violation grid, progressive sanction. And departments are organized, and this is a key because I'm going to shift to Ohio in a second. Departments are organized to maximize their ability to do that. You have all the courts, but you have a unified core and supervision policy. You have a system that is wired to bring this assessment to the judges, and then you support that by the way you deploy the caseloads, and by the way you train people, by the way you provide computerization so these people have more time to dedicate to dealing with the person, like a lifeguard, and less time just putting red flags all over the place. So here is the challenge in Ohio. And like Marshall said, and this is going to be followed by Fred Osher, Dr. Osher in a little bit, probation is the foundation for everything else. Probation is where the assessments happen that will lead to trying to cut the revolving door of felonies 4 and 5 coming in, to get better assessment, to try to place the right people in the great infrastructure that you have of these facilities and diversion programs, and to better utilize the mental health and substance abuse services. If you don't deal with this over the long term, you will not be able to make great progress in this state. What you have here, no overarching policy that applies to all the departments. About 80% of the people are being supervised at the local department, at the hodgepodge of different departments following no state standards. About 20% are supervised in those departments that are run by the Department of Corrections. But overall, there is no standards that apply to all the departments. There is no data that is collected statewide. We do not know at any point in time who is on probation in Ohio, what do they look like, and just the basic numbers. And then you're still funding a large percentage of that population. Here is the dual system, so to speak. 47 counties, 15,000 probationers operated by the department. 41 counties, about 42,000 felony probations operated by the county. Underlying all this is funding from the state for diversion programs. And when we look at a county here, this is Franklin, right? Franklin is Columbus. We find out that 60% of the overall funding in that probation system is state funding, okay? When you put the underlay of the additional diversion funding. The DRC programs operate on some standards that are set by the agency, but at the end of the day, the judges have the ability to, have the discretion to thumb those standards. At the local level, probation departments are all over the map in terms of what they follow. Texas, as an example, in the mid-'80s, adopted standards for all probation departments in the state. And I'll tell you what those are in a little bit. So if you look at Texas and you look at Ohio, Ohio is, and you look at 1 to 10, 1 being no evidence-based practices standards that apply statewide, 10 evidence-based standard that applies statewide. Ohio is about 3. Texas is between a 7 and an 8. We have standards in law. You don't. You use various risk assessment. We are required to use the Wisconsin risk assessment in every department. Contact practices vary significantly. Texas has minimum contact standards at every level, high, medium, low risk. There is no statewide case data and tracking of performance. We know at any point in time in Texas who is on probation, what do they look like. Every department has to submit this case data, their performance standards and performance measures, and there is a goal set for reduction of recidivism and reduction of revocations, and this is tracked by the state and kind of funnel the money based on those performance standards. Example in Ohio, when we did a survey of the probation departments, the percentage of probation that are in the high risk category in Ohio varies from 1% in one department all the way to almost everybody in another department. The contacts for high risk vary from 2 per month in one department to about 20 per month in another. Pre-service training for probation officers average about 40 hours, but the range is 10 to 80. The average caseload size reported was about 125 per officer, but then it ranged from 55 to 350. All over the map in terms of basic stuff. We did a survey of the judges, and I thanks the Judicial Conference, Mark, for helping us with that, and we have very good responses. We did it through the internet. But this gives you an idea of the perception of judges. We asked the judges what will make PSIs more useful as sentencing. 71% said some objective risk assessment. So again, this is in the works, although there's no legislative mandate to do the ORAs, and we need to think about that. 57% said more consistent identification and explanation of criminogenic needs. 38% more timely completion and availability of the data at sentencing. So the judges are jumping at trying to get better information and more consistent information to make sentencing decisions and probation decisions. Responding to the question regarding the use of progressive sanctions, they didn't say anything because there is nothing. Oh, there we go. 88% of judges responded that they do not have a written grade of progressive or graduated sanctions. So each judge is looking at sanctioning schemes that are different from every other judge in that jurisdiction. 60% of the judges responded that in their court they use different sanctioning scheme. So, and I'm going to show you from the San Antonio research what that means and the problems with that. We asked them if you will allow for administrative hearing for violations, 68%, or if you have administrative hearing, 68% said that they did not. Will you support that? Half of them said they don't. An administrative hearing is a process that you set up in the jurisdiction that allows the probation officer, probation structure to have certain violation hearings without kicking it to the judge. And this is usually for minor offenses, and there's an agreement of what to do with these people in case they committed a BC type of violation. We have that in Texas, and eventually judges like it because it actually relieves them of a lot of paperwork and work on minor violations. But they have to trust the probation system, and that's a key to it. You routinely provided access to data? Basically, no. 70% said that they do not have basic data to understand who is completing probation successfully versus who is revoked. The outcome of probationers refer to state-funded programs and halfway houses. And again, it's a reflection of the lack of data and so forth. Impact of outcomes. So why is this structure important, and what is potential impact with outcomes? Let me just again go back to the comparison that we really can make. And we did visit some of the probation departments here, and we get some impression of the departments with, for example, the one in Columbus being a hell of a lot better than the one in Cincinnati. And, I was told not to be too blunt about it, but I am. And the reason that we did not show you results like this is because there is a lack of data, and we honestly did not spend years looking at this like we have done in Texas to show you the differences between Franklin County and Hamilton County. But let's assume for a moment that what we have learned in Texas may apply here. So you have Travis County is the model, spent 3 years reforming the whole system, well documented in terms of processes and so forth. And then you have Bexar County, and believe me, they do like me in Bexar County, even though I always feel that they're about to threaten me with shotguns down there to get me out of there. But the Bexar County is more like the Ohio structure, and this is what I mean. In Bexar County, you have each court running their own probation system, so to speak. And as I understand it, that's kind of the way it is in some of the places here. You have basically 19 different probation departments. They spend a lot of money just in the management structure of each of those core. About 15% of their basic supervision funding is being consumed by the management structure for each of those departments. Each of the cores have their own policies. We did a board this big to track each of their policy, and they're different. There is no agreement in those policies. Their PSI, and this slide is not showing well, but these are all the pages. They have like 100-page PSIs, and even the judges told us we really cannot make sense out of this. It's written in different styles, different narratives and so forth. And this is one of my favorite charts. We actually map a neighborhood in San Antonio where there were 595 persons living in that zip codes. This is misdemeanor and felony people under supervision. They were supervised under the policies of 22 different courts and supervised by 113 different probation officers. You could take that caseload in that neighborhood and have 6 officers supervise those people in that neighborhood under one set of policy. We discovered what they call in San Antonio my cousin's problem, and it is somebody in that neighborhood that is on probation by this court that comes in and he has a dirty urinalysis, but he's in treatment, and they say, okay, well, they do a little bit more reporting and leave him in treatment. A week later, his cousin, who is also on probation in the neighborhood, come in to a different probation officer. He's in a different court. He has a urinalysis problem, and they revoke him to prison for 5 years. And the guy goes, well, but how about my cousin? I mean, he did the same thing that I did last week, and he's still under supervision, and they do call it my cousin's problem. So this is the structure that have to be revamped, and because these are the results. These are our largest county. Harris County is Houston, Dallas, Travis is Austin, Tarrant is Fort Worth, El Paso is El Paso. This is the number of misdemeanor revocations out of the misdemeanor population under supervision. San Antonio revoked 40% of their misdemeanor population that year. 40% that year, 85% for technical violations. Okay, this is compared with everybody else. As you see, Travis, which is the model, is the lowest. Felony revocations over time, and the state tracks this very well. 2005, 2008, the number of felony revocations decreased in every of the counties. The largest decrease was in Travis County, the same for technical revocations. If you look at San Antonio, 79% increase in revocations. During that period, the state spent $57 million in funding just to get a huge cost in prison because of the increase in revocations. And this gives you a sense of the size of the numbers. So crime, and this is one that our district attorney, Susan Reed, when she saw this, she said, we need to fix this. Because San Antonio, and you see it here, has increasing crime of all the major cities in Texas, with the crime declining. San Antonio has been increasing in crime. We cannot directly relate it to the probation system, but there is a good sense anecdotally that because of the poor supervision, inconsistent supervision, there is, this relates to that crime picture. And we got everybody on board to try to change the system. Believe it or not, the judges went along. This is letters from all the judges at the felony level and at the district level saying we need to change this. And it was interesting because I think you'll see some of the initial reactions for the judges are like, you're screwing with my discretion, right? But once they get to understand what you're trying to do, you're not screwing with their discretion. You're giving them better tools to use their discretion well and more effectively. And once they understand that, they tend to support this deal. So they need 2 standards to conclude because none of these are in Ohio, and we have all of them in Texas, and this is an example of the thinking that needs to happen in the next few months here. We have one probation department per county in the rural areas of the state. We're large and bigger than Ohio. We have one probation department covering regions of the state. We need to use a validated risk assessment tool that is required statewide as part of the assessment process. You have ORAs here, you make that first step already, and the conversation is, do you make that required now to be part of the state assessment process? Case load should be risk-based, and contact standards should be in place. The state should have minimum contact standards that should apply to all probation departments. Programs inside and outside the department should follow evidence-based practices. It has been a lot in Texas, educating our people how to do the inventory system, that they go and check on local programs. They do that routinely. They score the programs of the local departments. They work with the local departments to try to improve them. And if they don't improve, then there are certain financial consequences. Supervision officers should have access to a unified system of progressive sanctions to manage non-compliance based on risk. Probation officers should be trained on evidence-based practices and how to apply them, and they should be part of a common curriculum that applies everywhere. Probation department need to report basic case data and performance measure to evaluate effectiveness, and something that we do through the budget. We set up certain performance goals based on funding for the probation departments, and you see those numbers going down, and in great part it's because of that performance goals that have been set up. So in a nutshell, and going back to the framework that Marshall laid out, we have a revolving door of 4 and 5 offenders, level 4, F5, F4, and F5. We need a more effective probation system, because if we do, a lot of those people are under supervision. If you reduce their recidivism, not only you increasing public safety, you're going to decrease the revolving door and hopefully increase some of the costs related to that. There is no clear criteria to effectively use the alternative. This has a lot to do with having assessment systems in place at the local level with certain state standards that can be utilized, so the judges have better information, and they're telling us that they want better information to make this decision. And if we do that at that level, it should also help with the better utilization of a great infrastructure of programs that you have. And we don't want to take away the fact that Ohio has spent a lot of time and a lot of money developing your community corrections alternative programs, developing your CBCF and halfway houses. And the key question now is, can we make those more effective? And it deals with all these complicated issues that we're trying to address. And finally, the patchwork of probation supervision, the need for standards to try to implement evidence-based practices is obvious the first step. If you don't have that, if you cannot agree on that, if you cannot pass it, and I have made Justice Stratton and the judicial branch our legislating framework, so somebody in your staff did a great job analyzing that and how can it potentially apply to Ohio. So that's a starting point for that. So I leave it there.
If you have questions, you can stand, or we can have people come to the mic. There's a mic set up right here.
Hi, I'm Ann Connell from Oriana House. Quick question. In your report, you have the recidivism data listed for CBCFs and halfway houses, and how you have it listed is all participants, not those that are just successfully released, which is a big difference, obviously, if you looked at the data. What was the reasoning behind that?
I'll give the non-research example that I often think about, but and then Dr. has to talk a little bit more about it, because obviously both charts are available in the longer report. We choose all participants just because we want to see the impact of the program on everyone who's sent to it. If you just look at successfully complete, or people who successfully complete a program, I mean, not to say this is happening, but just to say, if I want to create a successful program, I could make one of the requirements no criminal conduct. And lo and behold, my successful completers would have amazing outcomes, right? So unless you look at everyone who's sent to a program, you're likely going to get a skewed interpretation of the impact the program is having.
Even though you may get a skewed misinterpretation if someone didn't get the full benefit of the treatment services that were available.
Right, but I think the difference, Ann, is typically in the work we're doing, we're looking for a treatment effect. You know, what treatment effect do you get? And we make the argument that if you don't get the treatment, then
You don't get the effect.
You don't get the effect. Here, we're not necessarily looking at the treatment effect. All right, I think the point of showing the data is here's who we're putting into these programs. All right, and so we're putting a lot of people in these programs, and some of them probably shouldn't be there. And so we're seeing that it pulls these effects down because we've put people in without any necessarily standards across the state. So that's the difference for why it was presented here is all the people that went in versus what we usually hone in on when we're
Right.
looking for a treatment effect.
Because when the press release comes out, the press release is going to come out saying these residential programs don't work, which, by the way, I just got on my BlackBerry. So
Let me
maybe
give you
some unintended consequences.
Well, let me give you another angle why we did that. We are talking to the legislators, so as part of looking at this, there is a cost for people that go into the program that do not benefit from the treatment effect, that either
Agreed.
drop out before they complete the program and so forth. So depending on how high is your dropout rate, or how low or high is your completion rate, that will determine from a cost effectiveness perspective how cost effective those programs are. So when you look at the whole picture, you look, LaTesa has a very valid way of looking at it, and a program people, very valid way of looking at it, which is what is the treatment effect for the people that complete. But another valid way and necessary way of looking at it is how many of these people went to the program, how many did not complete, and there was an expenditure made for those people. And when you look at the overall picture, what is that telling you about the need to improve completion rate by improving the selection of offenders and improving the strategy? So that's the service we need to provide to our legislators.
I just don't think in your summary that's clear. My opinion.
That's fine.
Your paper.
Well, appreciate it. Yeah.
Other questions?
I'm Eleanor Stormer, a judge in Summit County, and I don't understand the entire process that you went through. Did you look at some of the newer crimes, say crimes that have been not necessarily invented, but perhaps toyed with in the last 5 years? Felony non-support comes to mind, some of the sex offender registration laws. Non-support, we end up sending people to prison because they don't pay. It's a fifth-degree felony. They may, in fact, be low risk. They don't really cause much problem, but they just aren't paying. At some point, you know, the prosecutor and the victim are standing there saying, you've got to send the guy to prison. You know, he goes out and he enjoys himself and the child isn't being taken care of. Or failure to register, where you have people who, and generally speaking, at least in my county, it's kind of low-hanging fruit, guys that, you know, in between an apartment, they don't register on time, they're easy to find, they're easy to pick up. You get 2 of them, it's a mandatory sentence of 3 years right now. Did you look specifically at crimes within the framework of the state, and if so, can you talk about that?
Sure. I know DRC has done several papers on this, documenting the impact, and we looked at it as well. It's one of the reasons why you see an increase in the prison admissions chart that I showed early on. You see an increase in felony level 3s is the biggest increase, felony 2s and 4s. A lot of those are where a lot of those new crimes or new criminal sanctions are being placed at. So it's part of the driver causing a 50% increase in F3 admissions between 2003 and 2008. It's also potentially bumping up the average sentence length from 26 to 28 months. So it's a contributing factor, and we documented it in some of our earlier presentations, the exact kind of amount, cost to the state associated with it. The admissions and length of stay problem is much bigger than just that, though, however, as we were looking at the analysis. But it's certainly a key contributor to the cause.
Is there a percentage that you can attribute to that?
Yep.
What's the percentage?
we don't have it, we can certainly get it for you and do a follow-up, let you know.
Hi, Erica Ford, Center for Families and Children, Cleveland. Both Dr. Latessa and Mr. Fabello talked a lot about having high-quality programs and probation departments that reduce recidivism. So coming from a program that we've only been in existence for a year and wanting to make sure that we have high-quality standards to ensure that we contribute to the reduced recidivism, is there a definition of what quality is? It's a very broad term that we've heard used in many, many different venues. And if we want to aspire to have a quality program, is there something that we can look to find that out?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we do have standards for looking at whether or not a program is evidence-based, and so there's a number of areas that we would go in and look at in terms of the program. A simple example is look at the staff, the quality of the staff, what criteria used to hire staff, how are they trained, what kind of support do they get. That would be one area. We would look at how you select your clients. You know, are you selecting folks that are appropriate for your program? For example, some programs will take anyone, and the end result is low completion rates and high failure rates. And so there's a number of indicators, and a number of people around the country have developed different ways to do this. We happen to have one. And so in our case, we actually then are able to tell the program where they're doing the right things and where they're not. As Tony indicated, a number of states use our process that we've developed, and Texas is one where they look at programs with regard to these criteria and try to improve the program based on that.
This question would be to any of you, but maybe particularly Mr. Latessa or Mr. Clement. You may know and probably know a survey of judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys in this state in 2008, I believe, administered by Ohio Criminal Sentencing Commission. Found some mixed data, but found some pretty strong sentiment in the area of, say, lesser sentencing for minor drug offenses, treating nonviolent drug offenses as mental health issues. Prosecutors and judges overwhelmingly did not support that. Obviously, defense attorneys took a different view. Judges and prosecutors generally supported the building of more prisons, did not think prison overcrowding was a driver in this matter. So clearly there was not necessarily a concern for cost. So assuming that's an important constituency, certainly judges and so forth, then how do you overcome that in terms of the range of reforms that you're discussing here?
I don't think it's necessarily about overcoming. I think it's the next set of process is getting the reactions to these findings, many of which we've shared with judges and prosecutors and other constituencies over the last 6 months, and working with them to develop policy options that everyone can agree will address these issues. I think at the end of the day, everyone wants to reduce the rate of reoffending and crime committed by people who fall in these F4 and F5 categories. The question is, what's the most cost-effective way to do that? And in other states, they don't have a lot of resources to put on the table, especially now. Luckily, Ohio has made significant investments in community corrections resources. And as we'll hear from Dr. Osher and the directors of mental health and substance use later this afternoon, the real challenge is, while you've got a significant pool of resources in community corrections programs, many of which provide some treatment as part of those programs, you don't have the same kind of resources available for a probation department that's looking to require a probationer to attend treatment as part of their probation. And so one unintended consequence that they'll highlight and that we're concerned about is people bumping up in the system in an effort because there's not that base level of treatment services available in the community. But at the end of the day, the goal is to reduce recidivism among these offenders. The question is, what's the most cost-effective way to do it?
Yeah, and just let me say, I didn't see the survey, but oftentimes surveys ask questions and the choice of answers is limited. If you give people surveys and you give them, if you say, are you willing to consider this if you have a high-quality program that provides these kind of services and these kind of supervisions, you might see different answers. My experience is that, and I agree with what's been set up here, this really isn't a political or an ideology based approach. It's an evidence-based approach. And I think I've worked in some very, very tough jurisdictions and states. But when you talk about what works and how do we change people's behavior, whether they're coming out of prison or whether they're in a probation department, we really are talking about what are the most effective ways to do that. I think that at the end of the day, that overcomes most of the ideology that's out there. I mean, you look at the data on prisons. We have a lot of people coming out without supervision. My guess is a lot of citizens in Ohio don't realize that. Can we do a better job identifying who should get supervision? I believe we can. Can we do a better job making sure that there are probation standards across the state? I think we can, and I can't believe that judges and prosecutors wouldn't support, you know, more effective programs and more effective probation departments. So, you know, I think the weight of the evidence at the end of the day will convince most that this is the right way for Ohio to go.
Just to follow up, if you can get that message out to voters, and I suspect many voters are not familiar with this kind of data, does that make their opinion about this matter more important than the legal community itself?
Well, you know, voters at the end of the day decide who's in office. So I would suspect it does. I haven't seen any recently, but there have been some public opinion polls here in Ohio that some of my colleagues have done. And it's interesting because the last one they did here in the state found that most Ohioans supported rehabilitation. They wanted offenders punished and held accountable, but they also wanted them to get services and programs. So, you know, the dividing line often with public opinion is around violent behavior. Definitely wants violent offenders off the street, but oftentimes they're willing to give other considerations to people who are drug users, for example, or have mental illness or are property offenders. But they want them to be well supervised. They want them to be in programs, and so I think that's the message that we take from the public opinion polls that we've looked at. So, and I don't think anything here is inconsistent with that message.
He's the Ohio guy, so I let Latessa talk about Ohio, but I give you the example of Texas, right? And by any means, it's a lot tougher than a lot of states in terms of high incarceration rate, high punitive approaches, death penalty, and so forth. The last 4 or 5 years have been a very dramatic shift supported by our prosecutors and our judges to really do what Latessa just said. We need to really improve how to handle the nonviolent offenders, particularly the ones that are drug involved, because at one point, paying for locking them up and not being effective when they come out and they return back is something that increasingly we cannot afford. And this is after having 160,000 prison beds. So.